The saddest puppy alive begs for help when vet realizes why he calls 911. A puppy, tiny, soaked, and shaking, shows up at a country vet's door, crying like it's begging for help. Its eyes are the saddest the vet has ever seen. And then it does something no animal should be able to do. It won't stop whining toward the road like it's trying to say something. When the vet finally checks its microchip, what he discovers makes his blood run cold. Within minutes, he's on the phone with 911, because this isn't just a lost puppy, it's a warning. But the deeper he looks, the stranger it gets. A black truck starts following him. A note appears on his door. Mind your own dogs. What could possibly make a puppy cry like that? And when the truth finally comes out, will the vet be able to save anyone in time? Or will he be the next to disappear? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The rain drummed against the windows of Dr. Linwood Pace's veterinary clinic, a steady rhythm that matched his measured footsteps as he moved through the darkened waiting room. At 4:30 in the morning, the world outside was still wrapped in darkness, but Linwood had always been an early riser. The quiet hours before dawn gave him time to prepare for the day ahead, to gather his thoughts before facing the stream of concerned pet owners and ailing animals that would soon fill these empty chairs. He flicked on the lights, casting a warm glow across the worn linoleum floors and faded educational posters that lined the walls. The familiar scent of antiseptic and pet shampoo filled his nostrils, smells that had become more like home to him than his empty house ever did these days. Thunder rolled overhead as Linwood made his way to the coffee maker, his weathered hands working through the familiar routine of measuring grounds and filling the water reservoir. The machine's gentle gurgling was almost lost beneath the sound of rain pelting the roof of his small country clinic. 5 years. 5 years since Sarah's accident, and still these pre-dawn hours remained both a comfort and a curse. They were his refuge from the memories that seemed sharper in daylight. Yet they also left too much space for thinking about what he'd lost. A sound cut through his thoughts, high-pitched and desperate, barely audible above the storm. Linwood paused, coffee cup halfway to his lips, and listened. There it came again, a cry that made his heart clench with its raw desperation. Setting down his untouched coffee, Linwood strode to the front door. The security light cast a pale glow across the wooden stoop, illuminating a tiny, shivering form. A puppy, no bigger than a loaf of bread, huddled against the doorframe as if seeking any shelter from the driving rain. "Hey there, little one," Linwood said softly, crouching down. The puppy looked up at him, with eyes that seemed too knowing for such a young animal. Its cry changed, becoming almost speech-like in its urgency. Linwood had treated thousands of animals over his 20-year career, but something about this puppy's demeanor sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the early morning air. Carefully, he reached out toward the trembling creature. The puppy didn't shy away, but instead pressed forward into his touch, its whole body shaking with cold and what seemed like fear. As Linwood scooped it into his arms, he noticed strange markings on its fur, dark smudges that looked like soot, and something else that made him frown. Inside the clinic's warm light, he got a better look. The puppy's cream-colored fur was indeed streaked with black soot, and its paws were stained an unnatural shade of green. This wasn't some random stray that had gotten lost in the storm. Something was very wrong here. "Let's get you dried off and checked out," he murmured, grabbing a clean towel from the supply cabinet. As he gently rubbed the puppy dry, he noticed how it pressed against his chest, as if seeking not just warmth, but protection. The thought made his throat tight with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. Under the examination lights, Linwood could see the puppy was a female, probably a golden retriever mix, no more than 8 weeks old. Despite her obvious distress, she held perfectly still as he checked her vital signs and looked for any injuries. Physically, she seemed unharmed, but her behavior spoke of trauma. "Where did you come from, little one?" he wondered aloud, reaching for his microchip scanner. To his surprise, it beeped positive almost immediately. Most strays weren't chipped, especially not puppies this young. The address that popped up on the scanner's display was local, just outside town, maybe 15 minutes away. Linwood knew the area. It was a stretch of land dotted with small farms and older homes, the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors but kept to themselves. The puppy whimpered again, pawing at his arm with those green-stained feet. The dye wasn't the kind used in regular pet grooming. It had an industrial look to it, like something you might find in a warehouse or factory. Combined with the soot stains, it painted a picture that made Linwood increasingly uneasy. He'd seen animals in bad situations before. It was part of being a rural vet. Sometimes you encountered cases of neglect or worse. But something about this puppy's desperate arrival at his door in the pre-dawn hours felt different. It felt deliberate, as if she had been sent to him specifically. Linwood sat in his office chair, the puppy cradled in his lap. She had finally stopped shaking but remained alert, her eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that was almost unnerving. He thought about Sarah then, about how she would have already named this little refugee, and started planning how to help her. Sarah had always been the one to push him into action when his natural caution made him hesitate. The rain continued its assault on the windows as Linwood struggled with his decision. The responsible thing would be to wait until normal business hours, to call the number associated with the microchip and follow proper protocols. But the puppy's strange condition and desperate behavior suggested urgency. "What are you trying to tell me?" he asked softly, scratching behind her ears. The puppy responded by pressing her head into his hand, that same pleading look in her eyes. It reminded him of something Sarah used to say. "Sometimes God sends us messages in unexpected ways. Our job is to be brave enough to listen." Linwood hadn't felt particularly brave since losing Sarah. He'd retreated into his work, into the comfortable routine of treating other people's animals while keeping his own heart safely walled away. But sitting there in the growing light of dawn, with this mysterious puppy looking to him for help, he felt something crack in those carefully constructed walls. He checked his watch, 5:15 in the morning. Too early for normal business, but maybe that was the point. The puppy had chosen this hour to appear on his doorstep, and every instinct he'd developed over 2 decades of veterinary work told him this wasn't a coincidence. Standing up, Linwood made his decision. He gathered the puppy in one arm while reaching for his heavy weather coat with the other. The little dog immediately settled against him, as if knowing they were finally taking action. "All right," he said, more to himself than to the puppy. "Let's find out what kind of trouble you're leading me into." Before heading out, he quickly wrote down the address from the microchip scanner and gathered a few basic supplies. You never knew what you might need when walking into an unknown situation with animals involved. The puppy watched his every move, her demeanor shifting from desperate to determined, as if she approved of his choice to investigate immediately. As Linwood stepped back into the storm, with his tiny guide tucked safely in his jacket, he couldn't shake the feeling that this rain-soaked morning marked the beginning of something bigger than a simple lost puppy case. The weight of the animal against his chest felt like both a responsibility and a promise, one that echoed with Sarah's voice about being brave enough to listen when God sends unexpected messages. The clinic's security light cast long shadows across the empty parking lot as Linwood made his way to his truck, each step taking him further from the safety of his routine and toward whatever mystery this small creature had brought to his door. The rain seemed to be letting up slightly, but the sky remained dark with more than just the pre-dawn hour. As he settled the puppy carefully in the passenger seat, her green-stained paws left faint marks on the old upholstery, silent testimony to the strange circumstances that had brought them together. The green stains on the puppy's paws nagged at Linwood's thoughts as he drove through the rain. Something about the coloring seemed wrong, industrial rather than decorative. The pup's labored breathing and unusual lethargy suddenly clicked into place in his medical mind. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as the pieces came together. "Carbon monoxide," he muttered, his heart rate spiking. The green dye wasn't dye at all. It was the telltale staining left by copper-based materials reacting with carbon monoxide. He'd seen it before in farm accidents, where animals had been exposed to exhaust fumes in poorly ventilated spaces. Without hesitation, Linwood pulled over and grabbed his phone. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? This is Dr. Linwood Pace, veterinarian in Buckhorn. I have reason to believe there's a carbon monoxide emergency at 204 Maple Street. He glanced at the address he'd written down from the microchip. I'm headed there now. A dog from that address showed up at my clinic with signs of carbon monoxide exposure. Understanding, sir. Are you certain about the address? Yes. The dog has a microchip registered there. Please hurry. If I'm right, anyone in that house could be in serious danger. The dispatcher assured him emergency services were on their way. Linwood pressed the accelerator, the wipers barely keeping up with the rain as he navigated the pre-dawn streets. The puppy whimpered beside him, as if sensing his urgency. When he pulled up to the small ranch house on Maple Street, everything looked deceptively normal. No lights were on, but that wasn't unusual for 5:30 in the morning. The yard was neat, with children's toys scattered across the lawn. A plastic tricycle lay on its side near the front steps. The sound of sirens grew in the distance as Linwood approached the front door. He pounded on it hard, calling out, "Hello? Anyone home? This is Dr. Pace. I'm a veterinarian. Please open up." No response. He tried the handle. Locked. Through the window, he could make out shapes in the darkness, but no movement. The sirens grew louder. 2 police cruisers and an ambulance rounded the corner just as Linwood was considering breaking a window. Red and blue lights painted the rain-slicked street in alternating colors as emergency responders rushed from their vehicles. "Door's locked," Linwood called out. "No response from inside." One of the officers immediately moved forward with a heavy tool, making quick work of the door lock. The smell hit them as soon as it swung open, that subtle, deadly odor that meant trouble. "Gas!" someone shouted. "Everyone back until we ventilate." But Linwood was already moving inside with one of the paramedics, both of them holding their breath. In the living room they found them, an elderly woman slumped in a recliner, a toddler curled up on the couch nearby. Neither was Tainsajiwam moving. The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Windows were thrown open, fans positioned to move the contaminated air out. The victims were rushed outside where oxygen masks were quickly applied. Linwood watched as the paramedics worked, his heart in his throat. "They're both breathing," one of the EMTs announced. "Pulse is steady but weak. We need to transport immediately." The grandmother stirred first under the oxygen mask, her eyes flying open in panic. "Emma!" she gasped. "Where's Emma?" "The little girl is right here," a paramedic assured her, gesturing to where they were treating the toddler. "You're both going to be okay." Linwood stood back as they loaded both patients into the ambulance, the puppy trembling against his chest. An officer approached him, notebook in hand. "Hell of a catch, Doc. How did you know?" Linwood nodded towards the puppy. This little one showed up at my clinic about an hour ago. The green staining on his paws indicated carbon monoxide exposure. When I scanned his chip and got this address," he shrugged. "Something felt wrong." The officer wrote quickly, then paused. "Thing is, Doc, the gas company's here now. They're saying this wasn't an accident. Someone tampered with the furnace, sealed the vents deliberately." A chill ran down Linwood's spine as he processed this information. The puppy pressed closer to him, as if seeking reassurance. "You said the dog just showed up at your clinic?" the officer continued. "Might need to talk to you more about that later." Linwood nodded, his mind racing. Who would deliberately set up something like this? And how had this small puppy known to seek help? As the emergency vehicles began to clear out, Linwood walked back to his truck, the weight of what had just happened settling over him. The puppy had stopped trembling but kept his eyes fixed on Linwood's face. "You're quite the hero," he said softly. Looking at the plant growing wild by the roadside, yarrow, nature's healer, he made a decision. "That's what I'll call you? Yarrow. Seems fitting for a little fellow who helped save lives today." Yarrow's tail wagged slightly at the name, the first real sign of happiness he'd shown since arriving on Linwood's doorstep. The drive back to the clinic was quiet, but as Linwood pulled into his parking lot, something caught his eye. A black pickup truck was idling across the street, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. As he watched in his rearview mirror, the truck remained motionless, its exhaust creating ghost-like shapes in the pre-dawn air. Linwood gathered Yarrow closer, an instinctive gesture of protection. The puppy grew very still in his arms, his eyes fixed on the truck. They waited in the cab of Linwood's vehicle until, finally, the black pickup pulled away, moving slowly down the street before disappearing around the corner. The incident left Linwood unsettled. In all his years as a vet, he'd never felt threatened. But something about that silent observer set off warning bells in his mind. He hurried inside the clinic with Yarrow, making sure all the doors were locked behind them. As he settled the puppy into a comfortable kennel with fresh water and some food, Linwood couldn't shake the feeling that this morning's events were far from over. Yarrow had brought him more than just a medical emergency. He'd brought a mystery, and possibly danger. The puppy watched him through the kennel door, those intelligent eyes seeming to hold secrets yet to be revealed. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, but the sky remained dark with heavy clouds, as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The evening shadows stretched long across the clinic's parking lot as Linwood finished his last rounds. The day's events with Yarrow and the rescue still weighed heavily on his mind. As he approached the front door to lock up, something caught his eye. A piece of paper fluttering in the autumn breeze, held in place by a thumbtack. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled the note free. 5 words, written in bold black marker. "Mind your own dogs." The paper was cheap, the kind you'd find at any drugstore, but the message sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. Inside, Nevin Brooks was organizing the day's files, his lanky frame hunched over the reception desk. He looked up when Linwood entered, immediately noticing his boss's troubled expression. "Everything okay, Doc?" Nevin pushed his glasses up his nose, a nervous habit he'd had since starting at the clinic years ago. Linwood handed him the note without a word. Nevin's eyes widened as he read it, then darted to where Yarrow was housed in the recovery ward. "This isn't good," Nevin said, his voice quiet but urgent. "First the black truck this morning, now this? Someone's trying to scare you off." "It's probably nothing," Linwood said, but his tone lacked conviction. "Just someone upset about a stray dog." From the recovery ward, Yarrow's whining grew louder. The puppy had been restless all afternoon, pacing his kennel and staring out the window toward the old stockyard road. Now his cries took on that same eerily human quality that had first caught Linwood's attention. Sarah, the front desk receptionist, gathered her purse to leave. "Dr. Pace, maybe we should just call the police? Let them handle whatever this is?" Linwood shook his head. "And tell them what? That we found a stray puppy and got a vague warning note. They've got bigger concerns." But Nevin wasn't letting it go. He'd been studying the green stains on Yarrow's paws all day. His natural curiosity piqued. "Doc, I've been thinking about this marking. It's not regular dye. See how it's got that particular shade? Reminds me of the stock marker pigment they used to use down at the old cannery district." Linwood raised an eyebrow. "The cannery's been closed for years." "The main building, yeah, but there are still some warehouses out there that get used. My cousin works security in that area. Mentioned seeing lights on sometimes, hearing trucks at odd hours." Nevin's words tumbled out faster as his excitement grew. "And that green dye? They used it to mark breeding stock. Real specific formula, hard to wash off." Yarrow's whining increased, his paws scratching at the kennel door as he stared intently towards the stockyard road. Something about the puppy's behavior made Linwood's chest tighten. He'd spent years trying to keep his world small, predictable, safe, ever since Claire's accident. The thought of investigating anything beyond his regular duties made his stomach churn. But watching Yarrow's desperate attempts to communicate something vital stirred memories in Linwood. Memories of why he'd become a vet in the first place, not just to heal animals, but to protect them, to stand between them and harm when necessary. "The thing is," Nevin continued, his voice lower now, "if someone's using those old marking systems, they're probably not running anything legitimate. And if they're willing to threaten a vet over a stray puppy..." Linwood walked over to Yarrow's kennel, opening the door to let the pup press against his legs. The trembling had returned to the small body. But those eyes, they held such intelligence, such purpose. "When Claire died," Linwood said quietly, surprising himself by mentioning his wife's name, "I convinced myself that keeping to myself was safer, easier, that maybe if I just focused on the simple cases, did my job without asking questions." He trailed off, running a hand over Yarrow's head. Nevin waited, knowing how rare it was for his boss to speak about personal matters. "But there isn't really such a thing as simple good and evil, is there?" Linwood continued. "Sometimes doing nothing is its own kind of wrong." The puppy's whining had softened to a low whimper, his eyes fixed on Linwood's face as if understanding every word. Sarah hesitated by the door. "What are you going to do?" Linwood straightened up, feeling something shift inside him, like a door long rusted shut, finally creaking open. "First, we make sure Yarrow's safe for the night. Then tomorrow, Nevin, I want you to tell me everything you know about that old cannery district." "You're not honestly thinking of investigating this yourself?" Sarah's concern was evident in her voice. "No," Linwood replied, "not alone anyway." He glanced at Nevin, who nodded immediately, understanding the unspoken request for help. As they secured the clinic for the night, Linwood found himself studying Yarrow more closely. The puppy's torn ear, the way he flinched at sudden movements while remaining incredibly brave. There was a story there, one that someone had tried to warn him away from uncovering. The note crinkled in his pocket as he moved around the clinic, checking locks and windows with extra care. "Mind your own dogs," they'd written, as if any dog in need wasn't his business. As if turning a blind eye to suffering was ever the right choice. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows across the parking lot. Somewhere in the distance, toward the old cannery district, a dog barked, the sound carrying clearly in the still evening air. Yarrow's head snapped up, his entire body tensing as he listened. Linwood felt his faith in simple rights and wrongs resurface, stronger than before. Whatever was happening, whatever had brought Yarrow to his door that morning, it wasn't something he could ignore. Not anymore. The moral clarity of this realization settled over him like a familiar coat he'd forgotten he owned. It fit differently now, perhaps, shaped by years of grief and caution, but it still fit, and wearing it again felt right, felt necessary. Nevin lingered after Sarah left, his nervous energy evident in the way he kept reorganizing the already neat desk. "You know," he said finally, "my cousin might be able to tell us more about what goes on out there at night. If you want to know, that is." Linwood nodded slowly, his decision already made. "Tomorrow morning, first thing. For now, let's make sure our friend here gets some rest." He looked down at Yarrow, who had finally settled, though his eyes remained fixed on the window facing the stockyard road. As Linwood prepared to leave for the night, he found himself remembering Claire's favorite saying, "Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway." For the first time in years, those words didn't bring just pain. They brought purpose. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement as Linwood's truck rumbled down the old industrial road. Nevin's directions had led him to a stretch of weathered buildings that time seemed to have forgotten. The former cannery loomed ahead, its red brick facade stained dark with decades of neglect. A rusted sign creaked in the breeze. "Buckhorn Salvage, private property." The gate hung partially open, and through it, Linwood could see a sprawling yard filled with twisted metal and stacked cars. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he pulled in, gravel crunching beneath his tires. The smell hit him first, a mix of motor oil, rust, and something else, something organic and wrong. As a veterinarian, he knew the difference between the regular scents of working animals and the sour notes of neglect. A man emerged from the office building, moving with the deliberate grace of someone used to commanding respect. Weldon Pike's reputation preceded him. Local business owner, war veteran, and according to some, a pillar of the community. But there was something in his cold gray eyes that made Linwood's skin crawl. "Well now," Pike called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "If it isn't Dr. Pace himself, don't often see you making house calls these days." His smile didn't reach his eyes. Linwood stepped out of his truck, forcing himself to appear casual. "Mr. Pike, hope you don't mind me stopping by. Had some concerns about animals in the area." Pike's expression hardened for a fraction of a second before smoothing back into that artificial pleasantness. "Animals? In a salvage yard? Can't say I've noticed any, except for the usual strays." A sudden bark echoed from behind one of the larger buildings, quickly silenced. Pike's jaw tightened. "Mind if I take a look around?" Linwood asked, already moving toward the sound. "As a vet, I'm obligated to investigate any potential cases of—" "You're trespassing, Doc." Pike's voice had lost all pretense of friendliness. He stepped closer, and Linwood caught the faint scent of cigarette smoke and something metallic. "This is private property. Whatever concerns you think you have, they end at my gate." But Linwood had already seen what Pike was trying to hide. Behind a series of blue tarps strung between buildings, chains rattled. He caught glimpses of several dogs, large breeds, their muscled bodies bearing the marks of hard living. But it was their eyes that haunted him. Dull, fearful, yet with that same desperate intelligence he'd seen in Yarrow. "Those animals," Linwood said carefully, "they need medical attention." Pike stepped directly into his path, close enough that Linwood could see the old burn scars on his hands. "What they need isn't your concern. Now, I respect what you do for the community, Doc. Would hate to see anything change that arrangement." The threat hung in the air between them, clear as day. Linwood held Pike's gaze, refusing to back down despite the hammer of his heart against his ribs. "We all have arrangements, Mr. Pike. Laws, responsibilities, basic human decency. Last warning." Pike's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Get in your truck and drive away. Forget what you think you saw here. Some questions aren't worth asking, for everyone's sake." Linwood retreated, each step feeling like a betrayal to those haunted eyes behind the tarps. But he knew he couldn't help them alone, not against someone like Pike, who clearly had power and influence to spare. The drive back to his clinic passed in a blur of thoughts and plans. He barely noticed parking or walking inside until Sarah's worried voice broke through his concentration. "Dr. Pace, Officer Crowell's here to see you. Says it's important." Tamsin Crowell stood by his office window, her county animal control uniform showing signs of a long morning's work. She turned as he entered, and something in her expression told him she already knew. "You went to Pike's place," she said. It wasn't a question. Linwood closed the door behind him. "You know about him?" "Been trying to nail him for years." Tamsin's green eyes flashed with frustration. "Animal trafficking, illegal breeding, fighting rings. We know it's happening, but every time we get close to proof, it disappears, along with anyone willing to testify." She ran a hand through her hair, displacing her cap. "Pike's got friends in high places, makes donations to all the right campaigns, even has a couple of deputies in his pocket, I suspect." "I saw dogs there," Linwood said quietly. "At least 6 or 7, chained up behind tarps. The way they looked." "Fight dogs," Tamsin nodded grimly. "He breeds them, trains them, sells them to rings across state lines. But proving it? That's another matter entirely." Linwood sank into his chair, the weight of what he'd witnessed settling heavily on his shoulders. "He all but admitted it, threatened me to keep quiet. But those animals, I can't just walk away from this." Tamsin studied him for a long moment, measuring something in his expression. "No," she said finally. "You can't, and you shouldn't have to." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Look, I've been building a case, slowly, carefully, but I need help. Someone with veterinary expertise who can document injuries, testify about fighting wounds versus natural causes." "It's dangerous," Linwood said, thinking of Pike's cold eyes and scarred hands. "Everything worth doing is," Tamsin replied, a hint of steel in her voice. "Question is, are you willing to help these animals, even if it means putting yourself at risk?" Linwood thought of Yarrow, of the desperate intelligence in his eyes that had led him to save 2 lives. He thought of Claire, of her unwavering belief in doing what was right, no matter the cost. "Tell me what you need," he said. Tamsin smiled, though it was grim with determination. "First, we document everything. Every injury, every scar, every sign of neglect. Build a case so solid that even Pike's connections can't tear it down." They spent the next hour planning, speaking in low voices about surveillance and evidence gathering. But beneath their careful strategizing lay a deeper understanding. They were now in this together, standing against a darkness that had gone unchallenged for too long. As Tamsin prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Be careful, Dr. Pace. Pike's not just dangerous because of what he does. He's dangerous because he's convinced himself he's untouchable." Linwood nodded, feeling the weight of this new responsibility settling alongside his grief and duty. "Sometimes," he said, "the most dangerous thing we can do is nothing at all." Back in the clinic's lab, Nevin hunched over a microscope, his glasses pushed up onto his forehead. The green dye from Yarrow's paws had been carefully swabbed and preserved on slides. Linwood and Tamsin stood nearby, watching as the young vet tech made careful adjustments to the lens. It's definitely industrial grade, Nevin said, straightening up. The kind they use for marking livestock. But there's something else mixed in. Some kind of metallic component I've never seen before. Tamsin leaned in to look through the microscope herself. Pike's salvage yard uses a special blend for their equipment marking. They claim it's proprietary. She glanced up at Linwood. This could be our first real piece of evidence. Linwood watched as Yarrow paced near the door, his nose occasionally lifting to sniff the air. The puppy's anxiety was palpable, like he knew they were finally piecing together his story. We need to document everything, Linwood said, pulling out his phone to photograph the slides. Chain of evidence matters if we want this to hold up. Nevin nodded eagerly. I've been doing some digging online. Look at this. He pulled up several newspaper articles on his tablet. There's been a string of missing hunting dogs reported in Marshall County, about 40 miles north. Premium breeds mostly, the kind that would sell for thousands to the right buyer. Or breed champions for fighting rings, Tamsin added grimly. She spread out a map on the counter. See these patterns? The disappearances follow a route that leads right through Pike's properties. He's got 3 different lots registered under shell companies. Linwood studied the map, seeing the devastating logic of it all. They're using the salvage yard as cover. Who'd question trucks coming and going at all hours, or strange sounds in the middle of the night? And the cannery's perfect for hiding their operation, Nevin said. Those old buildings are practically soundproof. Yarrow whined softly, pressing against Linwood's leg. Looking down at the puppy, Linwood felt a surge of both pride and pain. You didn't just wander here, did you, boy? You escaped. Found your way to someone who could help. Tamsin touched Linwood's arm gently. We need more than circumstantial evidence. Pike's got too many connections. We need concrete proof of what's happening in that cannery. A stakeout, Nevin suggested, his voice dropping to a whisper despite them being alone in the lab. Late night, when they think no one's watching. Linwood considered the risks. He thought of Claire, of how she'd never hesitated to stand up for what was right. The grief that had wrapped around his heart for 5 years seemed to shift, making room for something new. Purpose. We'll need to be careful, he said. Plan every detail. One mistake, and Pike's lawyers will tear any evidence apart. They spent the next hour plotting their surveillance. Tamsin marked optimal observation points on the map, while Nevin researched the best low-light cameras and recording equipment. Linwood focused on potential escape routes, knowing they'd need backup plans if things went wrong. I can borrow some gear from a friend in wildlife photography, Nevin offered. High-powered zoom lenses, infrared capability, better than anything we could buy on short notice. Tamsin nodded approvingly. I'll park my personal vehicle a few blocks away, less conspicuous than the county truck. We should all drive separately, approach from different directions. Tonight? Linwood asked, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. No better time, Tamsin replied. New moon, and the forecast shows cloud. Cover. Perfect conditions for surveillance. They agreed to meet at 11 o'clock, giving the salvage yard workers plenty of time to clear out. As they finalized the details, Linwood felt an odd sense of calm settle over him. For the first time since Claire's death, he wasn't just going through the motions of living. He was choosing to act, to fight for something bigger than his own pain. Yarrow seemed to sense the shift in energy, his tail wagging slightly as he looked up at Linwood with those knowing eyes. Linwood knelt down to scratch behind the puppy's torn ear. We're going to make this right, he promised softly. Whatever it takes. As Tamsin and Nevin gathered their things to leave, Linwood went to his office and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside lay Claire's old camera, a professional-grade DSLR she'd used for her nature photography. He hadn't touched it since the accident, but now its weight in his hands felt right, felt necessary. "This is what you'd do," he whispered, thinking of his wife's fierce dedication to documenting truth. "This is what you'd want." The rest of the afternoon passed in careful preparation. Linwood saw his remaining patients while Nevin charged batteries and tested equipment. Tamsin made discreet calls to trusted colleagues, ensuring backup would be available if needed. By sunset, everything was ready. Linwood stood at his clinic window, watching the last traces of daylight fade from the sky. The familiar ache of loss in his chest had transformed into something else, a steady resolve that burned bright and clear. Tonight, they would gather the evidence needed to expose Pike's operation. Tonight, they would take the first step toward justice for all the animals who couldn't speak for themselves. Tonight, Linwood would honor both Claire's memory and Yarrow's trust by doing what needed to be done. He touched the camera in his bag, then checked his phone one last time. 4 hours until they would meet. 4 hours until they would risk everything to uncover the truth. 4 hours until Linwood would fully step out of the shadows of his grief and into the person he needed to become. The moon hung behind thick clouds as Linwood crouched in the shadows near the old cannery. His heart thumped steadily against his ribs while he checked his watch. 11:15 p.m. Tamsin's car was hidden 2 blocks away, while Nevin had positioned himself on the building's south side with his borrowed camera equipment. The air felt heavy, thick with the promise of rain. Linwood adjusted Claire's camera strap across his chest, remembering how she'd taught him to use it years ago. A soft buzz from his phone. Tamsin's text. Movement at the loading dock. Through his binoculars, Linwood watched 2 men unlock the heavy metal doors. The sound of their boots on gravel carried clearly in the still night. As they disappeared inside, a new sound drifted out, the muffled chorus of dozens of dogs barking. "You hear that?" Tamsin's whisper came through his earpiece. "Yeah," Linwood replied softly. "And something else? Smell it?" A sickly sweet odor wafted from the building, the unmistakable stench of decay and neglect. It made his stomach turn. Beside him, Yarrow's nose twitched, and a low whine escaped his throat. They waited another 15 minutes until the men's truck pulled away. Tamsin's voice crackled through the earpiece again. Now or never. Linwood moved forward, staying close to the wall. The lock on the side door proved simple for Tamsin's practiced hands. Inside, darkness pressed against them like a physical thing, broken only by thin streams of security lighting. The barking grew louder, echoing off concrete walls. Their flashlight beams revealed rows of metal crates stacked 3 high. Inside each, eyes gleamed. Dozens of dogs, all sizes and breeds, packed tight in spaces barely big enough to turn around. "Dear God," Nevin whispered, his camera clicking rapidly. Linwood's throat tightened as he moved deeper into the space. Crude tags hung from each crate, numbers, weights, fighting records. Some bore red X's, their meaning all too clear. On the walls, tally marks had been scratched into the concrete, keeping count of wins and losses in some terrible ledger. "This is organized," Tamsin said, her voice hard with anger. "Professional. Look at these breeding charts." She pointed to a whiteboard covered in genetic lineages, tracking bloodlines like some twisted family tree. Yarrow pressed against Linwood's leg, trembling. The sharp crack of a door opening split the air. Boots on metal stairs, multiple sets. "Company," Nevin hissed. Before they could move, smoke bombs rolled across the floor, spewing thick gray clouds. Voices shouted. A figure emerged through the haze. Weldon Pike, his face twisted in rage. "Didn't take my warning serious, did you, Doc?" More men appeared behind him. The dogs erupted in frenzied barking. Linwood grabbed Tamsin's arm, pulling her toward the back of the building as the first shots rang out. They ran past the crates, the smoke burning their eyes and throats. A crash from above, sparks showered down as bullets hit the ancient electrical box. Fire bloomed along the walls, feeding on decades of dust and grease. "This way," Tamsin called, but her words cut off in a cry of pain. A section of roof collapsed, bringing down a steel support beam. It caught her leg, pinning her to the concrete. The fire spread rapidly now, turning the smoke orange. Heat pressed against them like a physical wall. Linwood tried to lift the beam, but it wouldn't budge. "Go," Tamsin ordered through gritted teeth. "Get help." "Not leaving you," Linwood growled, straining against the metal. Sweat ran down his face, mixing with tears from the smoke. A sharp bark cut through the chaos. Yarrow stood by a wall vent, scratching frantically at the rusted cover. Nevin appeared through the smoke, coughing. "Help me," Linwood shouted. Together, they braced against the beam. Muscles screaming, they managed to lift it just enough. Tamsin dragged herself free, gasping. The roof groaned ominously above them. Yarrow barked again, more urgently. Linwood saw what the puppy had found, an old ventilation shaft, barely big enough to crawl through. "It must lead outside," Nevin said, already working the cover loose. "The original cooling system." They could hear Pike and his men searching, getting closer. The fire roared, consuming everything in its path. Tamsin couldn't put weight on her injured leg. Linwood and Nevin half carried her to the vent. The shaft was tight, filled with cobwebs and rust, but they had no choice. Nevin went first, then helped pull Tamsin through. Linwood lifted Yarrow, pushing him into Nevin's waiting hands. The roof gave another threatening crack. Linwood took one last photo of the breeding charts with Claire's camera before diving into the shaft. Behind him, the building started to collapse. They crawled through darkness, lungs burning, following Yarrow's determined scrambling. After what felt like hours, cool air hit their faces. The vent ended in a drainage ditch 30 yards from the building. They emerged into the night just as the cannery's roof caved in completely. Flames shot skyward, painting the clouds red. In the distance, sirens wailed. Tamsin sagged against Linwood, her face pale with pain, but her eyes shone with fierce triumph as she held up her phone, showing the video she'd managed to record before the ambush. "We got them," she whispered. "We got the proof." Yarrow pressed close, his fur sooty but his tail wagging slightly. Linwood gathered the puppy in his arms, feeling the rapid beat of that brave heart against his chest. They'd survived, but more importantly, they'd exposed the truth. Now the real fight could begin. Emergency vehicles appeared on the horizon, their lights cutting through the smoke-filled night. Linwood held Tamsin steady, while Nevin ran to flag down the first responders. The fire continued to consume the cannery, erasing Pike's operation, but not the evidence they'd collected. Looking at his companions, Tamsin's determined face, Nevin's quiet strength, Yarrow's unwavering trust, Linwood felt something shift inside him. The wall he'd built around his heart since Claire's death cracked and crumbled, making space for new connections, new purpose. They were alive, they had proof, and they were in this together. Whatever came next, none of them would face it alone. Red and blue lights painted the night sky as emergency vehicles swarmed the burning cannery. The air thick with smoke and ash, Linwood watched firefighters battle the inferno that had nearly claimed their lives. His heart still raced from their narrow escape, the memory of crawling through that rusted vent shaft all too fresh. Tamsin sat on the back of an ambulance, grimacing as a paramedic examined her injured leg. Despite her protests, they'd insisted on checking her for smoke inhalation. Yarrow hadn't left her side, his golden fur now gray with soot, one ear singed from a falling ember. Hold still, buddy, Linwood murmured, kneeling beside the puppy. He gently examined the minor burns on Yarrow's paws and side. The brave little dog had risked everything to show them that escape route. Linwood's hands trembled slightly as he applied burn ointment, remembering how close they'd all come to being trapped in that inferno. "How is he?" Tamsin asked, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "He'll heal." Linwood looked up at her, seeing the same mix of exhaustion and determination in her eyes that he felt in his bones. "Just like you will." "The paramedic says it's just a bad sprain," she said, touching her wrapped ankle. "Could have been so much worse if you and Nevin hadn't lifted that beam." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding born of shared danger and purpose. Linwood felt his carefully constructed walls weakening. Since Claire's death, he'd kept everyone at arm's length, but tonight had changed things. He couldn't deny the connection growing between them. Nevin approached, his face grim. "Pike's gone. His men too. They disappeared before the first responders arrived." "Convenient," Tamsin muttered. She pulled out her phone, checking the video she'd managed to capture. "But we've got him this time. The breeding tags, the fight records, everything." Sheriff Dan Brewer's cruiser pulled up, its headlights cutting through the smoke. The heavyset man climbed out, adjusting his belt with deliberate slowness. Linwood had known Dan for years, had treated his hunting dogs, but something in the sheriff's expression made his stomach tighten. "Evening, folks," Brewer said, his tone carefully neutral. "Quite a mess we've got here." "Sheriff, we have proof of what Pike's been doing," Tamsin said, struggling to stand. Linwood steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Illegal breeding, dog fighting, animal abuse." "Now hold on," Brewer interrupted, holding up a hand. "What we've got is a fire at a privately owned business, unless you had a warrant to be on these premises." "Are you serious?" Linwood stepped forward, anger rising in his throat. "We nearly died in there exposing his operation." "And that's unfortunate," Brewer said. "But without proper documentation, any evidence you might have gathered won't hold up in court. Plus, the fire's destroyed most of the physical proof." Tamsin held up her phone. "I have video." "Taken while trespassing," Brewer cut in. "That's inadmissible, and with the building destroyed, there's insufficient evidence to bring charges against Mr. Pike." Linwood felt the familiar weight of injustice settling on his shoulders. He'd seen it before. Powerful men like Pike slipping through the cracks of a system they'd learned to manipulate. But this time was different. This time he couldn't walk away. "So that's it?" he asked quietly. "Pike gets away with it? Again?" "I understand your frustration, Doc," Brewer said, not quite meeting his eyes. "But we have to work within the law." "The law?" Tamsin's voice cracked with disbelief. "What about the laws Pike's breaking? The animals he's torturing? The people he's threatening?" Brewer's face hardened. "Officer Crowell, given your position with animal control, I'd think carefully about making unfounded accusations against respected members of this community." The threat was clear. Tamsin's jaw clenched, but she said nothing more. Yarrow pressed against her leg, as if sensing her distress. As the sheriff walked away, Linwood felt something shift inside him. He thought of Claire, how she'd always said that doing nothing in the face of wrong was its own kind of wrong. He looked at Tamsin, saw the same fire in her eyes that he felt burning in his chest. "This isn't over," he said softly. "No," she agreed, reaching down to scratch Yarrow's ears. "It's not." They watched as firefighters continued battling the blaze, the old cannery gradually collapsing in on itself. The night air grew colder, but neither moved to leave. Linwood found himself standing closer to Tamsin, their shoulders almost touching. "Thank you," she said after a while, for not leaving me in there." "Never crossed my mind," he replied honestly. She turned to look at him, her face soft in the flickering emergency lights. "You're different than I thought, Dr. Pace." "How so?" "When I first met you, after Claire, you seemed so closed off, like you'd built this wall around yourself." Linwood felt his throat tighten. "Maybe I had. But tonight, the way you fought to help those dogs, to help me." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It's good to see the real you coming back." He looked down at Yarrow, who gazed back with those knowing eyes. "Maybe it took this little guy to remind me who I really am." The puppy's tail wagged slightly, leaving small puffs of ash in the air. Despite everything they'd been through, despite the danger still ahead, Linwood felt more alive than he had in years. The numbness that had surrounded him since Claire's death was giving way to something else. Purpose, connection, maybe even hope. "We'll need a plan," Tamsin said, her tactical mind already working. "Pike won't stop. If anything, he'll be more dangerous now." "I know." Linwood gently examined Yarrow's singed ear again, his touch careful and sure. "But neither will we." The night stretched on, emergency crews working to contain the last of the fire. Linwood and Tamsin stayed, watching and planning, their shoulders now touching. Yarrow dozed between them, exhausted but safe. They all bore the marks of their ordeal: soot-stained clothes, minor burns, bruises that would bloom by morning. But something stronger had emerged from the flames. A bond forged in danger and sealed by shared purpose. A determination that transcended fear and corruption. And perhaps, in the quiet moments, between planning their next move, the first delicate threads of something more personal growing between them. The fight wasn't over, but tonight had proved they were stronger together than apart. Whatever came next, they would face it as one. The morning sun streamed through the clinic windows, casting long shadows across the scattered papers covering Linwood's desk. Nevin hunched over the singed ledger they'd managed to grab during their escape from the cannery, his brow furrowed in concentration. Coffee cups littered the surface, testament to their hours of work. "Look at this pattern," Nevin said, pointing to a column of numbers. His finger traced down the page, leaving a smudge in the soot. "These aren't just random figures. They're weights, Dr. Pace, fighting weights." Linwood leaned closer, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the desk. The numbers danced before his tired eyes. 45 pounds, 52 pounds, 48 pounds. Each entry followed by cryptic letters and dates. "And here," Nevin continued, flipping to another page. "These codes, they're delivery routes. See how they match up with the county roads? P12 means Pike Route 12. He's been moving them through back roads to avoid detection." "Smart," Linwood muttered, disgust evident in his voice. "Using salvage yard routes where strange vehicles wouldn't draw attention." Yarrow paced restlessly near their feet, his nails clicking against the linoleum. The puppy had been unusually agitated all morning, whining softly at random intervals. His behavior seemed to intensify whenever they mentioned certain entries in the ledger. "There's something else," Nevin said, spreading out several pages. "Look at these gaps in the sequence. Regular spaces where entries should be but aren't. Future transfers, maybe? Or breeding schedules," Linwood finished grimly. His fingers traced the missing lines. "Pike's planning more fights, more puppies." Yarrow's whimpers grew louder, drawing their attention. The puppy stood rigid, ears perked forward, as Nevin read through another list of names. "Ranger, Bullet, Juniper." At the last name, Yarrow let out a sharp bark, his whole body trembling. Linwood dropped to one knee beside him, running a gentle hand over the puppy's still healing burns. Wait, he said, memory striking like lightning. Juniper. I saw that name scratched into the wall at the cannery, remember? Right before the fire started? Nevin nodded slowly, realization dawning. It was part of that champion list. Juniper. Some kind of hound mix. Multiple wins listed beside her name. Yarrow pressed against Linwood's leg, those intelligent eyes seeming to plead. The vet felt his heart constrict as pieces clicked into place. She's his mother, Linwood breathed. That's why he came to us. He didn't just escape by accident. He was looking for help. The revelation settled over the room like a physical weight. Linwood remembered that rain-soaked morning, the desperate cries that had drawn him to the clinic door. Not just any lost puppy's whimpers, but purposeful pleas from a creature driven by love and determination. Look at his markings again, Nevin said, kneeling to examine Yarrow more closely. The shape of his ears, even through the damage, classic hound characteristics, and his intelligence. It would make sense if he came from champion lines. Linwood's mind raced. Pike's been breeding fighting dogs with hunting bloodlines, better instincts, more stamina. He felt sick at the thought. And Yarrow somehow got away. But came back to try to save his mother, Nevin finished softly. Yarrow's tail drooped, but his eyes never left Linwood's face. The vet remembered how the puppy had led them through the smoke, how he'd known exactly which vent would offer escape. This wasn't just animal instinct. This was conscious choice, driven by desperate purpose. The network's bigger than we thought, Nevin said, returning to the ledger. These delivery codes, they cross county lines, some even into neighboring states. Pike's been building this for years. Linwood stood slowly, his joints protesting the movement. He walked to the window, watching the morning traffic pass on Main Street. Ordinary people going about their lives, unaware of the cruelty happening in their own backyard. How many other dogs like Juniper were suffering right now? How many puppies like Yarrow had been born into that darkness? We need to figure out where they're keeping her, he said finally. These codes, can you track them? Map out the locations? Nevin was already pulling up his laptop. I can try. The salvage yard routes are pretty well documented in county records, if we cross-reference them with the dates in the ledger. Yarrow padded over to Linwood, pressing his nose against the vet's hand. The touch felt like a promise, both given and received. This small creature had risked everything to find help, had chosen them specifically, trusted them to understand. We won't let you down, boy, Linwood murmured. We'll find her. They worked through the morning, Nevin plotting points on digital maps while Linwood cross-referenced dates and weights. Yarrow dozed fitfully between them, occasionally waking to whine at particular names or numbers, as if confirming their discoveries. The scope of Pike's operation became clearer with each decoded entry. Fighting rings scattered across 3 states, breeding programs hidden behind legitimate business fronts, money flowing through shell companies and cash transactions. He's been careful, Nevin said, rubbing his tired eyes. Everything's compartmentalized. Even if we crack one location, he can shut it down and move the others. But now we know what to look for, Linwood replied. The weight patterns, the delivery schedules, and more importantly, he glanced down at Yarrow. We have someone who's been inside. The puppy's ears perked up, his tail giving a cautious wag. Linwood felt a fierce pride mix with his anger. This brave little soul had not only escaped, but had deliberately sought out someone who could help. Had somehow known, through instinct or desperation, that Linwood would understand. We need to be careful, Nevin warned. After the fire, Pike will be watching us, and these records show he has connections, maybe even with local law enforcement. Linwood nodded grimly. That's why we do this right. Build the evidence properly this time. No more night raids without backup. He picked up the ledger, studying the complex web of numbers and codes that represented so much suffering. But now they had a key to unlock it, and more importantly, a reason to keep fighting that went beyond just exposing crime. Yarrow stood, stretching, and walked to the door. He looked back at them expectantly, as if saying it was time to move from planning to action. Linwood couldn't help but smile at the puppy's determination. "All right, boy," he said softly. "Let's go find your mother." Morning light filtered through the clinic windows as Linwood, Tamsin, and Nevin gathered around the examination table, now covered with maps and documents instead of medical supplies. The weight of their discovery hung heavy in the air. "We need more help," Tamsin said, running her fingers through her hair. "Someone with real authority, but someone we can trust completely." Linwood's mind wandered back to a stormy night 3 years ago. "I might know someone," he said slowly. "State Trooper Marcus Decker. I treated his daughter's horse after a bad accident. Stayed up all night with the animal when everyone else said to put it down." "And the horse made it?" Nevin asked. "Made a full recovery." Linwood allowed himself a small smile. "Decker never forgot. Said he owed me one, and he's the kind of man who means what he says." Tamsin nodded approvingly. "State jurisdiction would help, especially since Pike's operation crosses county lines. Can you reach him?" Before Linwood could answer, the clinic's front door chimed. A burly man in oil-stained work clothes stood in the entrance, his weathered face tight with tension. Linwood recognized him as Deke Harlan, the tow operator who'd worked for Pike until recently. "Doc," Deke said, his voice rough. "Got a minute? Need to talk about Pike." They led him to the back office, where Yarrow immediately approached the newcomer, sniffing cautiously. To everyone's surprise, Deke knelt down, letting the puppy inspect him. "I should have spoken up sooner," Deke said, his calloused hands gentle as they scratched behind Yarrow's ears. "Pike used my equipment to move those poor animals. Said it was just transport for show dogs, but I knew better. Should have done something then." "Why come forward now?" Tamsin asked, her law enforcement instincts evident in her measured tone. Deke's face darkened. "Last week I caught him loading bloody crates onto my old flatbed, the one he kept after, firing me. Couldn't sleep since. Figure it's time to make things right." Linwood studied the man carefully. Guilt and determination warred in Deke's expression, but there was no deception there. "We could use your knowledge," he said finally, "especially about the transport routes." Nevin spread out their mapped locations. "We've identified several potential sites, but we need to know where they'd most likely move the dogs." "The Quarry Bridge," Deke said without hesitation, pointing to a spot they hadn't marked. "There's flood tunnels underneath. Perfect hiding spot. Pike uses it for special transfers, valuable breeding stock mostly." Tamsin leaned forward. "Could we set up surveillance there?" "Better," Deke replied. "I know how he operates. He's always looking for new breeding stock, especially rare bloodlines. Put the word out about a special pup for sale." He let the suggestion hang in the air. Linwood exchanged looks with his companions. It was risky, but it might be their best chance to catch Pike red-handed. "I'll call Trooper Decker," he decided. "We'll need official backup for this to work." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Trooper Decker arrived within 2 hours of Linwood's call, his tall frame filling the doorway as he strode in with purpose. "Doc," he said warmly, shaking Linwood's hand. "Sarah still rides that mare you saved. Never forgot what you did for us." They briefed him on everything: the ledger, the network, their suspicions about local law enforcement corruption. Decker's face grew grimmer with each detail. "This goes deeper than just animal fighting," he said. "These numbers suggest money laundering, maybe even connections to organized crime. We'll need to coordinate with our financial crimes unit." Deke provided crucial details about Pike's operation, security patterns, communication methods, preferred routes. Together, they crafted a plan that might just work. "We'll spread word through the right channels," Tamsin explained. "A rare German hunting breed, perfect for breeding. The price will be high enough to interest Pike, but not so high it seems suspicious. He'll want to verify the dog himself," Deke added. "That's when we can catch him." They chose the quarry bridge for the meeting point, isolated enough to make Pike feel secure, but with enough cover for law enforcement to hide. The flood tunnels that had once served Pike's purposes would now help them trap him. Linwood felt Yarrow press against his leg, the puppy's presence a reminder of why they had to succeed. Looking around the room at their unlikely alliance, a veterinarian, an animal control officer, a vet tech, a state trooper, and a reformed tow operator, he felt hope rising. 3 days, Decker said, checking his phone. "That's how long it'll take to get the surveillance equipment and backup in place. Can you have the bait ready by then?" Tamsin nodded. "I have contacts at other shelters. We can create a convincing backstory for our rare puppy that'll check out if Pike investigates." "He will," Deke assured them. "Pike's careful. He'll run every detail through his sources before showing up." Nevin had been quiet, studying the quarry bridge blueprints. "These flood tunnels," he said suddenly. "How many access points?" 4, Deke replied. "Main entrance under the bridge, 2 maintenance hatches on either bank, and an overflow tunnel that comes out near the old pump house." "Perfect for containing the area," Decker noted. "We can have teams at each point. No escape route." As they finalized the details, Linwood felt the weight of what they were attempting. If they failed, Pike wouldn't just disappear. He'd retaliate. But looking at Yarrow, remembering the desperate sounds of dogs in those crates, he knew they had no choice. "Everyone clear on their roles?" Decker asked finally. When they all nodded, he continued. "Remember, Pike's dangerous. He's got money and connections. Until we move, absolute secrecy is essential." "What about Juniper?" Linwood asked softly, thinking of Yarrow's mother. "And the other dogs?" "Once we have Pike in custody, we'll have probable cause to search all his properties," Decker assured him. "We'll find them, Doc. All of them." As their impromptu meeting broke up, Deke lingered behind. "Doc," he said hesitantly. "Thank you for giving me a chance to make this right." Linwood understood the weight of guilt the man carried. "Sometimes doing the right thing takes time," he replied. "What matters is that you're here now." They watched through the window as Decker's patrol car pulled away, followed by Deke's battered pickup. Tamsin stayed behind, her presence steady and reassuring. 3 days, she said quietly. "Think Pike will take the bait?" "He will," Linwood answered, certain now of their path forward. "His pride won't let him ignore it, and that pride will be his downfall." Yarrow barked softly, as if in agreement, and they all smiled despite the tension. 3 days to prepare. 3 days until they faced the man who had caused so much suffering. 3 days until justice or disaster. The autumn night wrapped around them like a cold blanket as they waited in position near the quarry bridge. Water thundered below, swollen from recent rains. Linwood crouched behind Deke's tow truck, his heart pounding against his ribs. Tamsin's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Target vehicle approaching from the north. 2 trucks, maybe 3. The rumble of engines grew louder. Headlights swept across the bridge's weathered guardrails, illuminating decades of rust and neglect. Pike's convoy rolled to a stop exactly where they'd predicted, the widest part of the bridge, where the flood tunnels gaped beneath like hungry mouths. "Hold positions," Trooper Decker's voice commanded. "Let him make the first move." Linwood watched Pike emerge from his lead truck, flanked by 2 men. Even in the dim light, his swagger was unmistakable. The man carried himself like he owned the night itself. A whimper from nearby made Linwood's chest tighten. Yarrow, secured safely in Nevin's car well back from the action, could sense his mother's presence. Through the truck's tinted windows, Linwood caught glimpses of movement in the crates, fighting dogs, breeding stock, innocent lives treated like commodities. Pike's voice carried across the bridge. "Where's my cellar?" That was Deke's cue. He stepped out from behind his tow truck, playing his part perfectly. "Right here, Mr. Pike. Got that specialty pup you asked about." Pike approached, his boots crunching on loose gravel. "Show me." While Pike was distracted, Linwood crept toward the lead truck. The plan was simple: document the dogs inside, get photos for evidence, then signal the takedown. But when he reached the truck bed, what he saw through the slats made his blood run cold. Juniper lay in a corner crate, her blue-gray coat dull with neglect. Her amber eyes met his, and in that moment, Linwood understood why Yarrow had fought so hard to find help. The champion breeding dog's spirit wasn't broken. It was burning with a mother's desperate love. Without thinking about the risk, Linwood reached for the crate's latch. He had to free her, had to end her suffering right now. His fingers worked the mechanism as Pike's voice grew louder, arguing about price. The latch clicked. Juniper stirred. "Hey!" Pike's shout shattered the night. "Get away from there!" Everything exploded into chaos. Pike sprinted back toward his truck as Trooper Decker's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Weldon Pike, you're surrounded. Shut off your engine and step away from the vehicle." But Pike had other plans. He lunged into his truck, gunning the engine. Metal screamed against metal as he slammed into Deke's tow truck, shoving it sideways. The impact sent one of the crates flying off the truck bed, straight toward the bridge's edge. Juniper's crate. "No!" Linwood lunged for it, but the crate crashed through the rusted railing. It hit the churning water with a splash, instantly caught in the current racing toward the flood tunnel's metal grate. A streak of golden fur shot past Linwood. Yarrow, somehow freed from Nevin's car, was racing toward the water. Without hesitation, the puppy leaped in after his mother. Linwood didn't think. He didn't hear Tamsin screaming his name or see Pike's truck fishtailing away into the darkness. He vaulted over what remained of the railing and plunged into the icy torrent. The cold stole his breath. Current grabbed him, tumbling him through darkness. He fought to surface, gasping as his head broke through. 20 feet ahead, the crate bounced through the waves, Juniper's frightened barks barely audible over the roar of water. Yarrow paddled desperately beside it, trying to guide his mother toward the shore. But the current was too strong. They were all being swept toward the tunnel's grate, a metal barrier designed to catch debris, to drown anything caught against it. Linwood swam harder than he'd ever swum in his life. His muscles burned. Water filled his mouth. He could see the grate looming closer, could hear Tamsin and the others running along the bank, powerless to help. 10 feet to the grate, the crate slammed against it with enough force to crack the wood. Juniper yelped in terror as water began pouring in. Yarrow, still somehow swimming, grabbed the crate's edge with his teeth, trying to hold it steady. 5 feet. Linwood's fingers brushed the crate, slipped off. He went under, fought back up. The current crushed him against the grate beside them. Pain exploded through his shoulder, but he grabbed the crate's handle with his good arm. "I've got you," he gasped. "Both of you." The crate was breaking apart. Water roared through the grate inches from their faces. Juniper's eyes met his, filled with a mother's trust. Yarrow whimpered, his small body trembling as he refused to let go. Linwood's grip began to slip. The current slammed against them with crushing force. Linwood's lungs burned as he struggled to keep his head above water while holding on to both the crate and the grate. Through the spray, he spotted something metallic glinting in the moonlight, a crowbar caught in the debris beside them. With trembling fingers, he reached for it. The motion sent daggers of pain through his injured shoulder, but he gritted his teeth and stretched further. His fingertips brushed cold metal. Just a little more. "Hold on!" he shouted to Juniper and Yarrow, though the roar of water nearly drowned his voice. Finally, his hand closed around the crowbar. The current tried to tear it away, but Linwood held tight. He wedged the curved end between the grate's metal bars, right where the crate was pinned. With every ounce of strength left in his battered body, he pushed. The crowbar groaned against the grate. Rust flakes sprayed into the churning water. Above the chaos, Linwood heard shouts from the bank. Deke and Trooper Decker were scrambling down the concrete slope with ropes. "Almost there," Linwood gasped. The crate shifted slightly. Yarrow whimpered, still refusing to let go of his mother's crate even as the wood splintered around them. With one final surge of desperate energy, Linwood threw his whole weight against the crowbar. The grate's ancient bolts shrieked and gave way. The section of barrier collapsed inward, freeing the crate in a rush of water and debris. "Now!" Linwood yelled. Ropes splashed down around them. Deke's powerful arms reached into the water, grabbing Linwood's jacket. Trooper Decker snagged the remains of the crate. Together they heaved as other officers pulled from above. They surfaced in a tangle of ropes and limbs. Juniper scrambled onto solid ground, shaking water from her coat. Yarrow pressed against her side, tail wagging despite his exhaustion. Linwood collapsed onto his hands and knees, coughing up river water. Behind, "You!" Tamsin's warning cry cut through the night. Linwood turned just as Pike's shadow fell over him. The salvage yard owner had climbed down the quarry rim, his face twisted with rage. A tire iron gleamed in his raised hand. "You're destroying everything I built," Pike snarled. Linwood pushed himself up on shaking legs. Blood from his shoulder wound stained his soaked shirt, but he stood his ground. Around him, Juniper and Yarrow growled. Mother and son united against their former tormentor. "What you built was wrong," Linwood said, his quiet voice carrying clearly across the water's rush. "It ends tonight." Pike lunged forward with the tire iron. But before he could strike, multiple flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Tamsin had arrived with state police backup. Officers swarmed down the slope. "Drop it, Pike!" Tamsin's command rang out. "You're under arrest!" For a moment, Pike's eyes darted between the approaching officers and Linwood. The tire iron wavered. Then he spun, trying to scramble back up the quarry wall. He didn't make it 3 steps. 2 officers tackled him from behind, driving him to the ground. The tire iron clattered away as they wrestled his hands behind his back. Handcuffs clicked shut. "Weldon Pike," Trooper Decker read out. "You're under arrest for animal cruelty, criminal conspiracy, attempted murder, and assault with a deadly weapon." He yanked Pike to his feet. "You have the right to remain silent." Linwood sagged against the concrete slope, the adrenaline finally draining away. His shoulder throbbed. He was soaked to the bone and shivering. But when Yarrow pressed against his leg, tail wagging, and Juniper gently licked his hand, warmth spread through his chest. Tamsin knelt beside him, her eyes full of concern. "The ambulance is on its way. You're crazy, you know that? Jumping in like that?" "Couldn't let them drown," Linwood mumbled. "Not after everything they've been through." She squeezed his good shoulder. "That's what makes you different from Pike. That's what makes you brave." Above them, Pike's angry shouts faded as officers led him away. The night was growing quiet again, broken only by the gentle sound of water and the happy whimpers of a mother dog reunited with her pup. In the days that followed, state police and animal control officers descended on Pike's compound. The morning sun revealed horrors hidden for years in plain sight. Behind the salvage yard's rusted cars and twisted metal, they found concrete fighting pits stained dark with old blood. Chains hung from posts, their links worn smooth by desperate dogs pulling against them. Tamsin led the evidence collection team through a hidden warehouse. Row after row of empty kennels lined the walls. They discovered training equipment designed to make gentle dogs vicious, shock collars, steel chains, and worse. In a back office, investigators boxed up ledgers detailing fights, bets, and breeding schedules. "Look at this," Nevin called out, holding up a folder. His hands shook as he showed Linwood the contents. Health certificates signed by County Inspector Morgan. He knew. He helped cover it up. The revelation sent shockwaves through local government. By sunset, Morgan had resigned, handing over documentation of years of bribes and overlooked violations. In court, Linwood's testimony proved crucial. He described finding Yarrow, the rescue at the cannery, and Pike's violent attack at the quarry. His quiet dignity on the stand moved even the most hardened jurors. "The evidence speaks for itself," he told the court. "These animals suffered while those meant to protect them looked away. That ends now." The jury took just 4 hours to return guilty verdicts on all counts. Pike faced 20 years in prison. After the trial, Nevin surprised everyone by announcing his career change. "Working with you showed me what really matters," he told Linwood at the clinic. "Those rescue organizations need people who understand medical care. I can help more animals there than I ever could here." Linwood smiled and pulled his young friend into a hug. "They'll be lucky to have you," he said softly. "And you'll always have a home here." The legacy of Pike's cruelty would take years to heal. But in that moment, as justice was finally served, hope blazed brighter than ever in Buckhorn. Life settled into a new rhythm at Linwood's hillside home. Each evening, after the clinic closed, he'd sit in his weathered leather armchair by the fireplace. Yarrow would curl up at his feet, his golden fur now glossy and healthy, a far cry from the soot-stained pup who'd appeared on that rainy morning. Sometimes, during these quiet moments, Linwood's hand would drift to the empty space on the couch where his wife used to sit. But the sharp pain that once accompanied these memories had softened into something gentler, a bittersweet reminder of love that still lived in his heart. 3 times a week, he drove out to visit Juniper at her owner's ranch. The champion hound had returned to her original family, who'd searched for her since her theft. Her amber eyes always lit up when she saw Yarrow, and the two would play in the sunlit paddock, their joyful barks echoing across the fields. His new role as county humane investigator gave his days fresh purpose. Working alongside Tamsin, they inspected farms, responded to welfare calls, and educated the community about proper animal care. Their partnership deepened with each case they solved together. "You've changed," Tamsin told him one afternoon as they finished checking on a rescued horse. "There's light in your eyes again." Linwood nodded, watching Yarrow chase butterflies in the pasture. "Grief doesn't go away," he said quietly, "but it can transform into something meaningful. These animals, they showed me that." The work wasn't always easy. Some cases broke his heart all over again. But now he had the strength to face the darkness and fight for those who couldn't, fight for themselves. His pain had become his power, his loss a lens through which he could see others suffering more clearly. The morning dawned with a familiar gray mist, raindrops pattering against windows just as they had 1 year ago. Linwood stood before the newly painted clinic sign, its fresh lettering gleaming despite the drizzle. Yarrow sat beside him, tail wagging gently, his coat now a rich golden color that sparkled with health and happiness. Hard to believe it's been a year, Tamsin said softly, stepping up beside them. She wore her county uniform, but today wasn't about work. Today was about remembrance. Nevin joined them. His usual nervous energy settled into quiet reflection. "Remember how tiny he was?" he asked, reaching down to scratch Yarrow's ears. "Now look at him. Strongest, happiest dog I know." Linwood watched as Yarrow leaned into Nevin's touch, so different from the trembling, soot-covered puppy who'd once cried desperate tears on his doorstep. "He knew exactly what he was doing that morning," Linwood said. "Coming here, finding us. Some would call it chance, but I believe it was more than that." The rain fell steadily, but Yarrow showed no fear. Instead, he looked up at them with bright, peaceful eyes that had once held such desperation and pain. Now they reflected only joy and trust. "One small life," Tamsin mused, slipping her hand into Linwood's, "changed everything." "And saved so many others," Nevin added. They stood together in the gentle rain, watching as Yarrow playfully chased a fallen leaf across the wet grass. His barks were no longer cries for help, but expressions of pure happiness, living proof that even the deepest wounds could heal with time, love, and courage. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.